Some of you may be surprised to see me here tonight because you thought that we're going to have a missionary priest come and preach this Mass, and that was the plan. Unfortunately, he had to leave earlier than expected, and so I got stuck giving a homily for him. So you're stuck with me tonight, but I'm going to try to preach about what he preached about the last three Masses. I paid extra special attention, if that's possible, because everyone always pays attention to the homily, right? Yes, Father Carlson, all the time. We never fall asleep. Okay, that's good. So don't fall asleep tonight either. So it's going to be a condensed version of his homily with my own input as well. The missionary that came here today was from the Apostles of Jesus, and the Apostles of Jesus started in 1964 from two Italian priests, and they went to Sudan. But when they went to Sudan, they were there for 4 years, and in 1968, the government kicked out all of the Christian missionaries. So they were all kicked out of Sudan. There's no Christian missionaries left. And so they had to go to Uganda in 1968. They started in Uganda, and the message of God has spread ever since in Africa because of the Apostles of Jesus. As a matter of fact, the Apostles of Jesus were the first missionaries set up from Africa for Africa. Father Richard, who was here this past weekend, even mentioned that when Pope, I think it was Pope Pius VI, don't quote me on that one, but a pope named Pius came to them and said, "You are called to be missionaries. You are called to be missionaries to one another." And so they did this, and they spread this great message of God. They were truly apostles of Jesus. You know, in our second reading today, we hear from Paul, one of the great apostles, who says, "Assume that you have heard of him and were taught in him." What he's talking about here is that people truly have heard of Christ and taught about him. But back then in 1968, and even now in 2012, there are places in this world where no one has heard about Christ. And this is why missionaries are needed. And this is why the apostles of Jesus started as well. Now, Pope John Paul II went there in 1985 to open up the first Eastern African university, college. And there he said, once again, I want you to be missionaries to Africa, but not only to Africa, but to the rest of the world as well. And so the apostles of Jesus heard this, and they too spread their missionary zeal. Now, mostly they're based out of Uganda, Sudan, Kenya, where Father Richard was from, but they also are in Italy, parts of Europe. They're even here in America helping us out. And this is beautiful. They do so much good work, but there is so much challenging stuff as well. Last night I was able to speak to Father Richard a little bit more one-on-one as we went out to eat, and he was telling me about the situation in Sudan. Now, of course, we know on the news that there's two governments of Sudan now, Northern Sudan and Southern Sudan, and they're very happy that in Sudan that there's now a Southern Sudan because this is where Christians can go and not be persecuted. However, when the war broke out between the rebels and the whole Sudan, before it was two separate governments, what happened was that they knew that the rebels could take refuge. The rebels were pretty much fighting for the Christian cause, that they could take refuge in the seminary. So they took refuge in there. It was almost used as a military barracks. Unfortunately, while there, the seminary started to get attacked as well. And so Father Richards has even spent nights there before, and he'll look around. And in the seminary, there's bullet holes all throughout the seminary because fighting took place there. And the seminary, as a matter of fact, has been destroyed. Now, about 2 years ago, Southern Sudan became an official government, and the seminary started to be protected, and they even opened up the seminary again. But unfortunately, there's nowhere where the seminarians can study without being, bullet holes in the wall. So one of the main mission appeals that they're doing, some of the money that they're collecting, is going to rebuild this seminary, a place where seminarians can go and become what? That they can become apostles of Christ, that they can spread the message of God. Now, Father Richard knows that this is tough times, and trust me, we all know that right now it's tough times. However, he also mentioned another beautiful quote from John Paul II. He says, even the poorest can find someone poorer than them. There's always someone poorer than us, someone that we can help out, and this is what we are called to do. Imagine this. Imagine if you're able to give money to this great cause and that these seminarians are able to go out and do what? Well, the apostles of Jesus, of course, there are three main charisms. Our education, so that they can educate other people. Healthcare, they do a huge amount of work with children who are suffering from HIV and AIDS, no fault of their own. And the third thing they supply is this religious education. Imagine if you could help them out with this, just by giving a little bit of money. Father Richard shared a great story. He said that when he was in Chicago as a chaplain studying, he was able to go and anoint people at a hospital. And one day he was called to the hospital. So he ran there with his badge and he showed up into this room. And the mother was almost deathly ill and could not speak, but her son was there. And the son looked at Father Richard and goes, "You are Father Richard, and you are from Kenya." Now, Father Richard goes, "Yes, do you know I'm Father Richard? Because it's on my name tag." But the son goes, "No, my mom knows you personally. My mom has been sending money for your education the last 25 years, and she has been supporting you." Now, Father Richard had never once met this lady, but when he went home and he started thinking about it, he realized that this name kept on coming in his mind over and over again because the superiors would tell him that this lady from Chicago is supporting his education. And it just so happened that he was able to go and anoint her in a time of need. This lady never expected to meet Father Richard. Father Richard never expected to meet her. Yet God had them cross paths. There was a reason why she supported his mission. And there's a reason why he went to go and anoint her. Why? Because he is an apostle of God, the apostles of Jesus. This is what their mission is about. And my brothers and sisters, they need help. They need our help. What do they need? First and foremost, they need our prayers so they can succeed, so that they can stay in safety. The Bishop of Northern Sudan, by the way, has been in exile for I think over 10 or 15 years because if he enters into the country, he will be executed. We don't think this happens anymore. It still does. In southern Sudan, once again, it's peaceful right now, but they still need our prayers for their safety, so that the message of Christ can spread, the message of peace. So they need our prayers, but they also need our financial support. When we think about the church in America, missionaries used to go back to Europe and beg for money so that they could build churches. We look at the cathedral in St. Paul. I brought Father Richard there last night. He said, "This is amazing." And I said it was because of the missions that this church was built and the first settlers here in Minnesota. And now we can spread this gift back. We can spread it back to the church in Africa, but not only in Africa, but to the world. And so I ask you, Father Richard would ask you, every missionary around the world would ask you to support them. Why? So that they can have the bread from heaven. After the Eucharist today, we'll have a second collection for the missionaries, and all the money will go to the apostles of Jesus and that they can continue to spread their mission. And I encourage you to spend some time in prayer and figure out if God is calling you to support them, not only with our prayers, which is a guarantee, but also financially as well.